Good evening, everyone. I'd like to say first, welcome to University of Georgia President Jerry Moorhead, Vice Chancellor Cecil Staten, and Mr. Ray Gilbert, who will be our judges for the evening. I'd like to welcome all of you, students, faculty, administrators, friends, and alumni of the UGA at Oxford program to this, the fifth iteration of the UGA versus Oxford debates. You've probably heard this, but I'll remind everyone in the audience tonight, the series is tied 2-2, so this will have us uneven again for 3 years, bragging rights to one of these teams for 3 years. So we're very happy you're all here. Welcome also to members of the Athens and University community at large. And then, of course, I'd like to welcome our Oxford guests and our UGA team for the evening. I'm Dr. James McClung. I'm the director of the UGA at Oxford program, and very happy to welcome you all here for what I think will be an absolutely fantastic evening of intellectual exchange and humor that I think you'll all enjoy very, very much. This night would not at all be possible if not for Dr. Ed Panetta. And Ed, where are you seated? So I extend a special personal thank you as well to you, Ed. I'd like to thank our sponsors from the Terry College, Dean Ayers, from the Grady College, Dean Davis, from Franklin College, Dean Dorsey, and from SPIA, Dean Lindquist. I'd also like to thank Jami Sarnagar from The Last Resort, who hosted the two teams today for a very nice pre-debate lunch. So I want to say a word briefly about the nature of the UGA at Oxford program, and those of you who've been on the program and those of you who've sent your children on the program understand it is a program designed to immerse students into the life of Oxford University, and we're very proud of that. It's a unique opportunity for students to experience teaching directly by working with Oxford faculty members in their tutorial classes. Our program has been in existence, I'm proud to say now, for 25 years this year. And as I said earlier at the reception, we owe a huge debt of thanks, of course, to our founder, Dr. Judith Shaw, who's here with us this evening as well. Now, very quickly, on to the events of tonight. What's great about this debate is that it is unique. Both of these teams are made up of experienced debaters, but what they're doing tonight is utterly different than anything they've encountered before because it's a special, bespoke, this evening only type of event. It's utilizing different aspects of the debating format that is native to each group so that neither has an advantage. You'll find information about that format in your program. You too, this year, for the first time in our history, will be able to participate in the debate tonight by logging on to the Top Hat course for the evening's program, which is located on page 1115. Information for that may be found there. Let me please ask you all, if you've not done so, to silence your mobile devices before you begin doing that. Be happy to hear from you when you are offered the opportunity to begin asking questions via our moderator, Monica Kaufman-Pearson, who we're very, very happy to be joined by tonight and who will be our Master of Ceremonies shortly. Now, I want to introduce now the Vice Provost for International Education at UGA, Kavita Pandit. Dr. Pandit currently serves as the Associate Provost and as a tenured faculty member in the Department of Geography. She directs the UGA Office of International Education, which is set out to promote comprehensive internationalization at UGA. Dr. Pandit currently also serves on the board of NAFSA, which is an association of international educators with over 10,000 members. Please join me, if you will, in welcoming Dr. Kavita Pandit.
Thank you, Jamie. To the many thanks that you've already offered, I would like to add one more. I thank you for your outstanding leadership of the UGA Oxford program and I extend my appreciation to you and your team, Maggie Fosberry, Hayes Willingham, Jennifer Sonnenberg, and your many student workers for the months of effort that have gone into preparing for today's debate. Please join me in expressing my thanks to Jamie McClung and his team. So I do want to take just a minute to underscore Dr. McClung's comments about the very special nature of the UGA Oxford program. Even better than my own words are the comments that students make in their program evaluations every year. Let me just share comments made by two past students. The first student noted, "Oxford made me love to learn. For once, I wasn't just cramming for the test. I was really formulating coherent, intelligent opinions that I could defend against the tutors and loving it." A second student writes, "We became locals in town, studying in the libraries, dining at formal dinners, punting on the Thames, and even watching the Eights, the annual crew races amongst colleges. Above all, the best memories will always be the bonds and fellowship we had living in the same house." One of the reasons that I feel that this debate that is held periodically and this event is so important is that for one evening it brings UGA Oxford program to the Athens campus. The arguments, points, and counterpoints made by the debaters give us just a little snapshot of the sort of learning that takes place at UGA Oxford. And of course, the fact that the debate is always so hugely entertaining also makes it not unlike the experience of those studying at UGA Oxford. At this time, I have the pleasure of introducing the 22nd President of the University of Georgia, Jerry W. Moorhead. President Moorhead is a 1980 graduate of the UGA School of Law and the first alumnus of UGA to be named president in more than 45 years. President Moorhead is a Meggs Professor of Legal Studies in the Terry College of Business, where he has held faculty appointments since 1986. He has received several university-wide teaching awards, including the Josiah Meggs Award, UGA's highest honor for teaching excellence, the Richard B. Russell Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching, and the Lothar Trust Outstanding Honors Professor Award. Prior to becoming president in July 2013, President Moorhead served UGA in many key administrative roles, including Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost, Vice President for Instruction, and Director of the Honors Program. Please join me in welcoming UGA President Jerry W. Moorhead.
Thank you, Dr. Pandit, for that introduction. And I want to express my thanks and appreciation for everything that you do and your office does to build strong academic partnerships between the University of Georgia and many, many institutions all around the world. We believe at the University of Georgia that those partnerships enrich the education of our students. And it is events like the one that we are celebrating this evening that truly make this a special place to attend college. I am particularly grateful to Jamie as well as to Ed for their work in coordinating this debate, and I truly would like to thank everyone that is responsible for what is now a 25-year record, a distinguished record of excellence in study abroad education through our Oxford program. I had the chance this past summer to visit the Oxford program again, and it is clear that our students truly receive a world-class educational experience as a part of UGA at Oxford. The teachers, or should I say the tutors, who instruct our students are very, very demanding. They have high expectations for what is expected from our students, And it is no wonder that our students consider this program to perhaps be their most challenging and rewarding academic experience when they attend the University of Georgia. Tonight, I also want to extend a special welcome to our visitors from Oxford's Union Society, as well as to their debate opponents from the University of Georgia. At a time when communication in many sectors of our society lacks civility, lacks reason, and lacks depth, we are grateful tonight for the commitment of these 6 outstanding individuals to promoting courteous, logical, and evidence-based discourse. At least we hope that's what's going to happen this evening. We look forward to hearing from you, learning from your arguments, and we know that this is a topic of great national and international importance. I'd like to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about the other 2 judges for tonight's debate, Dr. Cecil Staten and Mr. Ray Gilbert. Dr. Staten has a very distinguished record of service to higher education in the state of Georgia. He currently serves as the Vice Chancellor for Extended Education for the University System of Georgia, and in that role, he oversees on a system-wide basis our priorities related to international education as well as military affairs. Dr. Staten served as a Georgia State Senator for a decade, including 2 terms as chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee on Higher Education. He also has 15 years of experience as a university faculty member and administrator, and has a particular connection to Oxford University, having earned his Doctor of Philosophy degree from Oxford. Mr. Gilbert also has ties to the United Kingdom. Born just outside of Edinburgh, and we're pleased that Scotland decided to stay a part of the United Kingdom. He, particularly for this debate, he studied applied mathematics at St. Andrews University, Scotland's oldest institution of higher education. I visited that campus many years ago, and it is truly a very special place. Mr. Gilbert relocated to the United States in 1994 after serving more than a decade as director at Initial Personnel Services, one of UK's largest staffing firms. He has since become a leader in Atlanta's vibrant international business community, and as executive director of the British American Business Group, he has been instrumental in guiding that organization's efforts to raise scholarship funds for students at the UGA at Oxford program. He also currently serves as area director at Advantage Resourcing, one of the world's leading staffing companies. Please join me in welcoming our judges. Finally tonight, I would like to welcome the moderator for this debate, a true legend, Ms. Monica Kaufman-Pearson. Ms. Pearson, as I think everyone in this hall knows, is a renowned Atlanta television personality. She's also a UGA alumna, graduating recently with a master's degree from our esteemed Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication. She retired in 2012 after 37 years as a news anchor person with WSB-TV in Atlanta. She now hosts a weekly radio show, writes a column entitled Monica Matters, and she teaches at Atlanta Metropolitan State College. She has received numerous awards for her distinguished work in journalism, including 33 local and regional Emmys, and the Legacy Award from the National Association of Black Journalists. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Pearson as she opens the 5th and decisive debate between the University of Georgia and Oxford.
Thank you very much, President Moorhead. It is my honor to moderate this debate tonight, but I must tell you I had a sleepless night because this is my first debate. The topic is very timely. Drones technically are unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. Now, many of them are used as crop dusters and even as aerial cameras to map out neighborhoods. But now, drones are often identified as unmanned combat aerial vehicles used mainly by the United States in Syria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and its affiliates. The resolution to be debated tonight is one the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House are grappling with. On balance, United States drone strikes enhance its national security objectives. Now, before we begin the debate, I have some housekeeping rules. Please hold all applause until a speech is completed. Our debate format tonight is a little bit of a New Orleans gumbo. It is a combination of American and British debate, styles of debate. Plus, for the very first time, an audience participation session between the second and final speeches for each team. There will be a total of 6 speeches, 3 on each side. The first speech will be timed to 8 minutes. If speakers exceed their time limit, they will hear this. We do have timekeepers in the audience. As a moderator, I will recognize each speaker. Because the University of Georgia team is arguing the affirmative position, it will deliver the first 8-minute speech. Then the Oxford Debate Society will have 2 minutes to cross-examine the UGA team, and the speaker must respond. This follows the American debating style. That will be followed by the Oxford Union Debate Society presenting its first speech, again with an 8-minute limit. Then the University of Georgia team will have 2 minutes to cross-examine Oxford, and again the Oxford speaker must respond. Now, things get a little dicey during the second 10-minute speeches and the third 6-minute speeches. Points of inquiry, interruptions by the opposition are permitted. That's the British style. But the interruption cannot occur in the first or the last minute of the speaker's time. However, a speaker may decline an interruption or accept it, but our teams have agreed that a speaker must respond to at least 2 challenges. Now, I'll explain how you all will be participating and how this will work. As Jamie said, you can read it in your program right now. If you can't wait, that's on page 11. So let's get busy. I call the House to order for a debate on the resolution. Resolved, on balance, United States drone strikes enhance its national security objectives. The chair recognizes Ms. Eilidh Geddes from the University of Georgia for a speech not to exceed 8 minutes.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Eilidh Geddes, and I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who made this possible. Our opponents, who flew all the way from Oxford, our judges, President Moorhead, Dr. Staten, and Mr. Gilbert, for taking time out of their busy schedules, our moderator, Monica Kaufman-Pearson, for running this debate, and of course, my teammates, Chetan, who was great to work with, and Logan, who was amicable despite the smoking ban. I would also like to let our opponents know just how excited the whole of campus was to have them here. Todd Gurley was seen running through the quad this week yelling, "The British are coming!" But not everyone in Athens knew just which Oxford we were referring to. When my teammates went to rent their tuxes and told the shop assistant they were debating students from Oxford, he excitedly responded that he couldn't wait to see the UGA Ole Miss debate. Now, with these pleasantries in mind, the University of Georgia must stand resolved that, on balance, U.S. drone strikes enhance its national security objectives. I'll start tonight by defining some key phrases from the resolution. First is drone strikes. As John Ubersachs, a former military analyst, puts it, drone strikes are the launching of explosive missiles from a remotely operated aerial vehicle and come in 4 varieties: targeted killings, signature strikes, overt combat operations, and covert combat operations. U.S. national security objectives are defined by the 2014 Quadrennial Defense Review as protecting the homeland, projecting power, and defeating enemies abroad. And finally, on balance means when all factors are taken into consideration as defined by the Oxford Dictionary. This means that the question of this debate isn't about whether drones are perfect or the most ethical policy, but rather about whether they improve the chances of achieving our national security objectives as outlined relative to what the other options would be. It is important to keep in mind that our objectives are limited by our history. We can't wipe the slate clean. I'll make a couple of arguments about how drones help us protect the homeland by fighting terrorism and are relatively beneficial compared to the alternatives. First, drones are an effective means to prevent terrorism as they disrupt leadership and make planning much more difficult. As Kenneth Anderson, professor of international law at American University, argues, drone warfare makes the planning and execution of complex plots difficult, if only because it is hard to plan for years down the road if you have some reason to think you will be struck down by a drone but have no idea when. The unpredictability and terrifying anticipation of sudden attack, which terrorists have acknowledged in communications, have a significant impact on planning and organizational effectiveness. These claims are not just theoretical. Empirical evidence from Pakistan suggests that drone strikes lead to decreases in the number and lethality of terrorist attacks. Patrick Johnston of the RAND Corporation and Anoop Sarbhai of Stanford University used data about terrorist activities in regions of Pakistan and find that drone strikes are associated with decreases in particularly deadly tactics, such as suicide and IED attacks, which are destabilizing urban areas. Pakistan is incredibly important geopolitically, given its nuclear status, and minimizing this instability is in our best interests. Now, drones have been effective in Yemen as well. To understand the necessity and success of drone strikes, look no further than Anwar al-Awlaki, a prominent al-Qaeda leader in Yemen who organized multiple attacks against the US. Just to name a few of his rampant offenses, he oversaw the 2010 plot to detonate 2 US cargo planes, and he helped organize the Christmas Day bomber attack in 2009. Now, President Obama has publicly stated that he would obviously have preferred to capture al-Awlaki, but multiple Yemeni police attempts proved futile, leaving drone strikes the only feasible option. He is quite the public success story for the drone program, but does not represent a rare case. Quite to the contrary, drone strikes have taken out the head of the Pakistan Taliban, and a strike in the Pakistan tribal belt killed al-Qaeda's deputy leader, Abu Ayyaha al-Libi. And terrorism is still a very real threat. As David Benjamin, former coordinator for counterterrorism at the US Department of State, says, the possibility of a devastating attack or series of attacks, possibly including weapons of mass destruction, is real. We should not lose sight of the fact that al-Qaeda has aggressively sought nuclear materials since its earliest days and biological weapons since the late 1990s. Additionally, drones accomplish the same goals with fewer adverse consequences than other possible policies. First, the number of civilian deaths is lower. As Rosa Brooks, a professor at Georgetown Law and former counselor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, puts it, critics often assert that US drone strikes are morally wrong because they kill innocent civilians. This is undoubtedly both true and tragic. But it's not really an argument against drone strikes as such. War kills innocent civilians, period. But the best available evidence suggests that US drone strikes kill civilians at no higher a rate, and almost certainly at a lower rate, than other common means of warfare. She continues, the evidence suggests that if the number of civilian casualties is our metric, drone strikes do a better job of discriminating between civilians and combatants than close air support or other tactics that receive less attention. Some claim that drone strikes spur resentment and boost terrorist recruitment, but these claims are not supported by data. Imite Etzioni, professor of international relations at George Washington University, argues, these statements, which may at first seem obviously true, are not supported by data. In fact, the resentment of the United States has many sources, and this resentment was high before drones were used, and is high in several nations in the Middle East where drones were never used. And second is other available alternatives may not satisfy the same national security objectives. Daniel Byman, a professor in the Security Studies program at Georgetown University, says, in an ideal world, militants would be captured alive, allowing authorities to question them and search their compounds for useful information. But in war zones or unstable countries, such as Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, arresting militants is highly dangerous, and even if successful, often inefficient. And third, drones enable us to enter into conflicts where we are not able or willing to send troops. For example, drone strikes have been used successfully in the conflict with ISIL. As David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, puts it, what we are facing now in Iraq with ISIL is a greater threat to our security than what we have ever seen before. Now, separate from the question of whether drones are better on the ground in combating terrorism than the alternatives, we must also consider the impact of boots on the ground on our troops, who are unrepresentative of the American population and heavily drawn from low-income and historically discriminated against communities. Our troops are weary from 2 decade-long engagements, and instances of PTSD are at an all-time high. In conclusion, the key question in this debate is not whether drones are perfect, but whether we should prefer them to what the alternative would be. And thus, we are resolved, on balance, U.S. drone strikes enhance its national security objectives.
The chair recognizes Ms. Polina Ivanova from Oxford Union for cross-examination not to exceed 2 minutes.
Hi, is this working? Yeah. Hi. So you say that drone strikes, we'll start with your points step by step, that they disrupt leadership structures in these terrorist organizations. But is that true when, for example, and I'll say this again in my speech later, the CIA in discussions and leaked notes call drone strikes effectively like cutting toenails, because once you get rid of one terrorist leader, the next one comes along. It's a replaceable system, and once they do reappear, they're much more vengeful. They have to be much more vengeful because they're replacing someone who's just been assassinated by a machine in the sky.
So first, we'll point to the couple of examples that I talked about in my speech of leaders that had been highly influential, and it was a significant win when the drone strikes eliminated them. For instance, al-Awlaki. And the second point is that even if they can replace these leaders, there is still this significant disruption. They have to train someone new. They have to find that person. If that person had made plans in the past, those plans are undermined. I think in Osama bin Laden's compound, they found documents that he had written that suggested that drone strikes had indeed made their operations much, much more difficult. The communications were shot. I think they were unwilling to use electronic communications because of drone strikes, and all of these things point to the fact that they do disrupt their activities.
But it's interesting that you mentioned al-Awlaki because he's one of 4 US citizens that have been killed in drone strikes. Him, including 2 weeks later, his 16-year-old son, a schoolboy from Detroit. Is it, and do you agree that it's a national security objective to kill US citizens when only one of those 4 US citizens was explicitly targeted, and that's a statement by Barack Obama?
So the criteria that we established, we did establish a protocol for what would happen in this. And there was in this situation where it was a US citizen, and there were 3 criteria. The first is that, should I continue or?
And thank you, Ms. Geddes.
Yep.
Now the chair recognizes Mr. Mayank Banerjee from the Oxford Union for a speech not to exceed 8 minutes. Mr. Banerjee.
Good start. I got an applause. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming along tonight. And I actually want to thank you all here for the absolutely wonderful welcome that we, as the union team, have received. Now, as a group, we feel incredibly lucky to be here. And in particular, I know there have been so many thank yous this evening, but just from our personal view, we really want to thank Dr. McClung for inviting us here in the first place. Not only has he saved us from the atrocious weather back in England, he's actually just been the absolute best host that we could have hoped for. And as such, I would just like, at least from our side, and hopefully from yours as well, just to thank Dr. McClung for making the event happen. So, thank you. Okay. Now, another reason that all three of us are extremely grateful to James is that he's given us an opportunity to promote the amazing UGA Study Abroad program that you have at Oxford. I really think it's an absolutely fantastic program, and I can't encourage you enough to get involved in Oxford and to study there. However, please don't go there thinking that you will ever learn anything about drones. Okay? It's really something that none of us three had ever really thought about before. And so imagine our collective delight when we found out over lunch today that this topic has actually been one of the focuses of the college debate team for the last academic year. Thank you for that one as well. As Polina and I realized on our way back from lunch, we're slightly out of our depth. To put it simply, no one on this team has a cute British accent. I look nothing like Hugh Grant. And tonight, we're up against debaters who actually know what they're talking about. Still, if there is one thing that Oxford teaches you, it is the ability to sound convincing when you are totally clueless. So tonight, we on the opposition will try and convince you of 2 points. First of all, I'm going to argue that in order to assess the impact of US drone strikes on national security, we actually need to fully understand the nature of US drone policy at present. Tonight, I'm going to argue that this policy is at best one that you as Americans ought to question, and at worst is one which is being used to systematically and often pointlessly carry out assassinations with little regard for civilian casualties. Secondly, Lisa and Polina will argue that even if US drone policy was not shrouded in secrecy, it is a policy that is actually counterproductive in terms of national security. Drone strikes cripple government intelligence operations by turning favorable allies against the US, and they provide the ultimate recruitment tool to those who are already working to undermine America. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we on the opposition will seek to argue that if you support US drone strikes, you are effectively supporting the continuation of the constant attacks on the American people that we have seen for the last decade or more. Nonetheless, let me move away from such emotive language and try and focus in on the facts. To fully understand US drone policy, an obvious point to start is to consider when the government actually feels drone strikes are justified. And I have here a quote directly from Eric Holder, the ex-Attorney General, and he claims that we only take these kinds of actions when there is an imminent threat, when capture is not feasible, and when we are confident that we are doing so in a way that is consistent with federal and international law. On the surface, at least, they do seem to be a legitimate set of guidelines. However, as always, the devil is very much in the detail. Let me focus you in just on 2 key words: imminent threat. It turns out that in order to be posing an imminent threat, there is no actual requirement that you pose a threat in the immediate future. Not only that, but the US government has a fairly laid-back interpretation of what actually constitutes the threat. To illustrate a point, I want to use the CIA guidelines that are used to differentiate between civilian and militant casualties of drones. Now, I know this probably isn't normal for this kind of debate, but we don't really know anything about this kind of debate either, so we're just going to go with it. So could all the men in the room please put your hand up? Just very briefly. Wow. Could you keep your hand up if you're aged between 18 and 35 and consider yourself an able-bodied male? Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Please look around. Look how many of you there are here. Thanks very much for that. Now, I want you all now to imagine that this debate was taking place on the other side of the world in Pakistan. Imagine that in this debate hall, there was just one member of the audience who is suspected to be a threat by the US authorities. Just suspected, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if the US was to carry out a drone attack on this very hall, every single member of the audience who had their hand up would be considered a militant. And the US would have just carried out one of the most successful drone strikes in history. I hope you now see why the Independent Bureau of Investigative Journalism have estimated that drone attacks in Pakistan have killed over 3,000 people, of which less than 2% have been high-profile targets. These figures are only those for Pakistan, one of the very few countries where the US government openly admits to using drones, and therefore one of the very few areas where verifiable data is relatively readily available. In fact, this is actually symptomatic of the level of secrecy under which US drone policy operates. Drones have become the default weapon of choice for the Obama administration, and the number of attacks under his presidency have grown exponentially. Just a few days ago, President Obama, as Eilidh said, approved action against ISIL, drone action, after supposedly spending months trying to decide how to take on this threat. What he did not say, however, was how drones have already been operating against ISIL in both Iraq and Syria for months now, completely unbeknownst to the American people. Obviously, I know that this isn't really common knowledge, and one of the perks of having a friend who's just spent 3 months working for a major TV network is that when a government spokesperson has to re-record an entire interview because of letting slip that important detail, you do get to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, my job this evening was quite simple. It was to convince you of one thing. We on the opposition feel that US drone policy, as it stands, can hardly be considered a policy at all. If this was a Hollywood film, it would be the beginnings of a conspiracy. If this were a Greek tragedy, it would already be showing signs of those ignorance and hubris that ultimately lead to disaster. Now, it's really interesting that the proposition, Eilidh, mentioned Rosa Brooks, because I actually have her to finish off the speech as well. And this is what she said to sum up drones. She's the Defense Department advisor, and I think professor at Georgetown. She said that right now we have the executive branch making a claim that it has the right to kill anyone, anywhere on Earth, at any time, for secret reasons based on secret evidence in a secret process undertaken by unidentified officials. That frightens me. Ladies and gentlemen, that frightens me too, and I will leave it to my colleagues later to convince you why you should be worried as well. Such a disastrous policy is not just bad for America's standing in the international community, but it is already having ramifications for the safety of this very nation. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Logan Gramzinski from the University of Georgia for a cross-examination not to exceed 2 minutes.
Thank you. What country attacked us on 9/11?
It wasn't a country. I'm not sure, but I think so, yeah.
I would agree with that. All right. You made a point in your speech that drone strikes turn allies against us. I guess my question is, are you talking about Great Britain, our ally who cooperates on drone strikes? Or are you talking about Pakistan, the ally where bin Laden was living a mile away from their own military academy? Which allies are you referring to?
Okay, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because as far as allies are concerned, I'm not. The fact is, US counterintelligence relies on working with imperfect governments, right? Drone strikes turn people against these already imperfect governments who are at least willing to engage. Effectively what happens is you get a bad government replaced by an even worse one. And that's, as I think it's on balance, right? Taking all things into account. And that's why we feel that that's not a healthy objective.
Okay. I also thought you, quite right, made quite a show with the hand-raising questionnaire and said, quote, if this debate occurred in Pakistan, the U.S. could drone strike it quite successfully. I guess my question is, are debates even allowed in the tribal areas of Pakistan where the government has ceded sovereignty to the Taliban? How would a debate even occur there where they've cracked down on dissent?
Okay, again, dissent happens in those tribal areas. We actually at the union last year had Malala Yousafzai come and speak. So, very famous, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not just debates. So Lisa's going to talk about, there was a wedding in Yemen, which happened, and it was in a tribal area, and it was bombed. There was no one really attending it was just a suspected link to a terrorist. But that wedding was bombed, 15 people died, and I personally don't think that's fair.
All right, I'm glad you brought up Yemen. So my next question is quite simple. What should the United States have done with regard to al-Awlaki?
Sorry?
What should the United States have done with regard to al-Awlaki? The speech did not challenge the fact that he was a terrorist or an imminent threat to the United States.
I think those...
Sorry,
okay.
that will not be able to be answered.
Sorry.
We're out of time. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Okay, this is the round where interruptions may take place. The chair recognizes Mr. Chetan Hebbale from the University of Georgia for a speech not to exceed 10 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and judges, thank you all very much for coming out tonight. I'd like to especially thank the Oxford debaters for coming all the way out to the former colonies for this debate. You know, it's usually a Southern tradition to have sweet tea, but I'm afraid all our tea for the event ended up in the Boston Harbor somehow. I'm not really sure how it got there. But to the point, while our esteemed opponents have presented a number of reasons why they believe U.S. drone tactics are not helping us achieve our national security objectives, we must remember the context for why we find ourselves here today. The threat of international terrorism is both real and widespread. Modern-day warfare is characterized by an enemy we cannot always see and one that is constantly moving from one location to another, be it Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, the list could go on. If we all accept this as a reality, it is not just the United States' national security at stake, but those of the UK and the world at large. The affirmative team believes the United States' use of drones is both a viable and rational response to this threat, one that is more accurate, minimizes the loss of both US and civilian lives, and can effectively apply lethal force to areas we cannot always see or reach. Now, Mayank's speech, while very eloquent and raised a series of good points, seems to have missed a broader framing question of the debate. What was the first thing, or maybe not the first thing, the third thing that Eilidh defined in the 1AC? On balance. On balance means compared to the alternatives. While we agree United States drone policy is not perfect, it is to a large degree shrouded in secrecy and does result in some civilian deaths, is there an alternative that you have presented that is less lethal than the status quo? First, war kills civilians, period. War is always bloody and unfortunately costs innocent lives. However, drones kill fewer civilians than any other military weapon. Would you rather us insert ground troops or have conventional airstrikes? The traditional weapons of war, like bombs, shells, mines, and mortars, cause more unintended damage to both people and property than drones ever could. Drones have the ability to follow targets for days or weeks in advance to allow operators to predict when a target is sufficiently isolated so that they can allow for a strike that is unlikely to harm civilians. So again, all of you, yes?
Actually, the whole idea of civilians not being targets or trying to avoid civilian targets as much as possible is now actually incorrect, and we're talking about current drone strikes. Obama has said that
I mean, we would on face disagree with that claim, but
are not taken into account when striking against ISIS.
So when the United States establishes a criteria to allow for a drone strike, again, this was the question of imminent threat. There's a series of behavioral patterns that you have to display in order for you to be considered for a strike. Are you actively abetting or encouraging terrorist attacks, such as Anwar al-Awlaki, which I'll get to in a little bit? We can see what they are doing. Are they in jihadi training camps? Then we'll allow for a strike. And it's not just a strike when we see people gathering. So however many of you males in this area, you wouldn't just be struck for no reason, have to exhibit a certain behavioral pattern, and we would wait until you're isolated from any other civilians before we decide to take a strike. Yeah.
My argument was if this was in the tribal area of Pakistan, they would be exhibiting that pattern. They would be 18 to 25.
I mean, if you are seen giving a speech or at a rally to incite war against the United States, I think we are all justified in thinking you are a threat to not only the United States but all global security. I'm not sure there's any confusion there. The people that are doing that in FATA, the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan, are exhibiting those behaviors, which is precisely why they're targeted. Now, you seem to have missed another point that Eilidh made earlier in her speech. It is not U.S. firepower that is causing the most civilian casualties. Almost 6,000 civilians have died as a result of Taliban and al-Qaeda IED and suicide attacks. That is 6 times the broadest estimate for total civilian deaths from drone strikes. However, increased drone use has single-handedly plummeted the rate of suicide attacks with almost a 50% drop after a spike in drone presence in 2010. Abandoning our drone program now will almost certainly see that trend reversed.
Point of information.
Not now. Preventing the resurgence of suicide attacks is critical, given that al-Qaeda has conducted suicide bombings at Air Force bases in Pakistan that reportedly serve as nuclear weapon storage sites. for an organization that has claimed acquiring weapons of mass destruction for the defense of Muslims is a religious duty. It is a moral imperative for both the United States and the United Kingdom that we prevent nuclear capabilities from falling into the wrong hands. Now, he cited a bunch of statistics, some from Rosenberg, some from the Bureau of International Journalism, investigative journalism, which we will on face reject. 3,000 people have not died from drone strikes. Chris Woods, who leads the Bureau of Investigative Journalism and whose research has served as the basis for the harshest attacks on Obama's drone policy, reports that far fewer civilians are dying from drones. In fact, he reports a total of 0 to 4 civilian deaths in Pakistan last year. Now, there are 3 journals that tabulate civilian deaths: the Journal of Long War, the New America Foundation, and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. And the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, in fact, uses the broadest classification for what is termed a civilian. So it's not just 18 to 35, it's 18 to 35 that is not involved in any terrorist activities decidedly. So, here's a quote from him. For those who are opposed to drone strikes, there is historical merit to the charge of significant civilian deaths. But from a contemporary standpoint, the numbers just aren't there. The broadest estimates for civilian deaths from drone strikes range from 174 to 1,047, not 3,000. Those are civilians killed in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, not just Pakistan. That is between 8 to 17% of all civilian deaths as a percentage of total war fatalities. The U.S. air campaign in Kosovo in 1999 was hailed as an international military success, but had over 45% of fatalities come at the hands of civilians, almost 3 times as many deaths, and it was considered a success. Ultimately, innocent people have been and will be killed by drones. We cannot deny that or diminish their importance. But on balance, drones are the least damaging option if we want to minimize civilian casualties. So now we'll talk about kind of the legal precedent and the legal mechanisms by which the United States goes about conducting drone strikes. Thank you, Mayank, for outlining the 3 criteria by which the United States decides to execute a drone strike. I'll give you a quick story. We all remember the Christmas Day bomber of 2009. So a young student from London, Omar Farouk Abdul Muttallah, tried to blow himself up in a plane he was on over Detroit. He tried to do that because of a man who was an American citizen at the time in Yemen, Anwar al-Awlaki. Months before the United States authorized a strike, the Obama administration submitted intelligence to the Department of Justice, which conducted additional analysis to ensure the action was consistent with U.S. laws. After a thorough intelligence review, he was deemed not able to be arrested. No one could read his Miranda rights, but he was an imminent threat. He had been trying and on many occasions succeeded in encouraging people to carry out terrorist attacks in the West, as Eilidh mentioned in the first speech. The Yemeni army had tried and failed multiple times to capture him. Thus, the only way to resolve this was an unmanned drone strike, which ended his life in September 2011, 2 full years after the incident. If the executive could willy-nilly just execute anyone they wanted at will, I'm not sure why they waited almost over 2 years to kill Anwar al-Awlaki, who was known to be abetting acts against Western nations. This is the real global precedent the United States has set in terms of extrajudicial killing, conducting actual intelligence analysis to observe the international norms of war. Now, Mike quickly made a claim that the United States drone strategy is only killing low-value targets. We would on face reject that claim, and Eilidh cited a number of high-profile terrorists who have been killed. Anwar al-Awlaki, who is the regional commander of al-Qaeda, Ahmad Godane, the co-founder of al-Shabaab in Somalia, Abu Hafsa Hiri, the al-Qaeda chief of operations in Pakistan, Bahruddin Haqqani, the commander of military operations, Simon Cowell, a former host on American Idol. Just kidding. Although I don't know if any of us would be opposed. Now, why do you think it is, though, that we have started killing low-level targets? We have killed off all of the senior command, and they cannot effectively train an upper echelon to conduct the same high-level casualty attacks that the previous leaders could. We actually have a list of 30 other Taliban, al-Qaeda, and ACAP leaders that have been taken out by drone strikes, which I'm happy to show you after this debate. But second, and more importantly, drones do, in a large extent, take out low to mid-value level targets, some of which are the 18 to 35 aged males. The reason they are important is because these are the individuals tasked with carrying out the attacks that the senior level commanders are ordering. We are intercepting those that are physically detonating IEDs in populated areas and running suicide missions. Because of the intelligence that drones acquire, they are capable of decimating terrorist organizations at all levels.
Thank you, Mr. Hebbale. The chair now recognizes Ms. Lisa Wehden from the Oxford Union for a speech not to exceed 10 minutes.
I'd just like to start by thanking you all for inviting us here in the beautiful city of Athens. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you all, and you've been so welcoming. Whilst this visit may be brief, the friendships we have made are sure to continue, and I can't express my gratitude enough for James for organising this trip. However, I must admit that when this invitation dropped in my inbox from James, the first thing I thought about was, I can't wait to eat so much American fast food. Having recently come back from China, where I was given nothing but chicken feet to eat for a month, I was so excited about the prospect of Taco Bell and all-American burgers. Well, after ordering 5 portions of tater tots last night, that hunger has been satiated. But back to the task at hand. I must admit, I face pretty stiff competition, but I shall try my best to convince you, along with my teammates, why US drone strikes threaten rather than enhance the national security objectives of the United States. I want to begin by unpacking the question slightly. What exactly are the United States security objectives? Well, Eilidh did a pretty good job, but my reading, a 30-page speech by President Obama, did not, because it was completely pointless activity. The answer is glaringly obvious. The most important aspect is the fact that national security is the need to ensure the safety of the American people, both at home and abroad. The supporters of current drone warfare seem to have missed that simple point. They, along with the proposition side this evening, would tell you how, at the moment, drone strikes protect American lives by supposedly crushing the threat of terrorism. But that's simply not the case. In fact, on balance, current drone strikes are counterproductive. They do the exact opposite, and I'm going to show you how. US drone policy, as it stands, is an open invitation to endless war. We are sleepwalking into conflict zones across the world and fostering, rather than tackling terrorism. There is no way that this vision of the future, one that is bleak and one that is truly terrifying, enhances national security. Ask yourselves this: do we need friends in the fight of terrorism, or would we like to do it alone? Do we want to...
If the United States was not conducting drone strikes, do you think the threat of terrorism would go away?
I think that the threat of drone strikes enhances the likelihood...
But we agree the threat of international terrorism is real.
The threat of terrorism is real, but I think we need allies in that approach. And you'll find out later in my speech why. Do we want to tackle the problem at its root by helping countries that have regions of lawlessness and violence build strong, stable, and inclusive governments? Do we want to remove the threat of terrorism by denying its oxygen? And yet, current drone strikes do the exact opposite. They take these fragile regimes and destabilize them. Drones are being used in countries which have been strong allies of the US, but these alliances are crumbling with every strike. Drones were simply a weapon, a tool, a tactic.
Which nations specifically are we using drones where our alliance is crumbling?
Pakistan and Yemen, and you'll see later in my speech why.
Even though they have our approval?
But they've been voted 3 times in the Pakistani government to stop cooperation with the CIA in Pakistan. Drones were simply a weapon, a tool, a tactic, but they have become a military strategy in themselves, a symbol of US foreign policy in the worst way possible. Drone strikes on the territories of these fragile alliances become a tool of sabotage, reducing strong allies and governments with positive democratic ambitions into weak puppets of US foreign policy in the eyes of their citizens, who refuse to support a local government that allows its citizens to be quietly assassinated by a foreign power and don't even try to hold that foreign power to account. And so these governments, who have previously been allied to the United States, cooperating in the fight against extremism and terrorism, one by one these allies turn away from the US. And so the American counterterrorism strategy, in its long-term form, is completely undermined. Listen, as I just said, just listen to this. Not once, not twice, but 3 times now, Pakistan's parliament has voted to end the country's cooperation with the CIA. Leaders of Pakistan's most dangerous areas voted just last year to do all they can to obstruct NATO in the region unless the US ends its drone strikes.
Point of inquiry.
No, thank you. Last December, Yemen's parliament passed a motion calling for the United States to end its drone program in the country after a wedding convoy was destroyed by a strike. Ladies and gentlemen, how long are these governments going to continue to cooperate with the US that ignores the democratic demand of their people? For how much longer will they agree to fight terrorism alongside a United States that threatens to weaken them to the point at which they can no longer maintain their rule, can no longer defend their power and authority? Increasingly, popular extremist movements, these movements that thrive on the very hatred of the United States that is created by drone warfare. This Obama administration has thus failed its allies, failed in its commitment to strengthening its relationships with its allies, and failed its own counterterrorism strategy. A strategy that desperately requires the intelligence that these allies provide.
Point of inquiry.
No, thank you. This Obama administration is putting the safety of its American citizens at risk. But not only that. It's not only turned military allies against the US, it's turned ordinary people into enemies, friends into foes. Put simply, drone strikes have created more terrorists than they kill. People who watch their loved ones killed in drone attacks, their communities torn apart, are fired up with a personal vendetta against this very country. People who are aggrieved by attacks on their homes are forced to go out and fight. That's not my quote. That's a quote from renowned journalist Jeremy Scarhill, who spent much of his life in Yemen speaking to the very people affected by these strikes. The drone strikes have, quote, recruited thousands. Support for al-Qaeda in Yemen and Saudi Arabia, for example, is growing stronger every day, contrary to what the opposition has said. From 300 members in 2009 to a staggering 700 over just 3 years later. And of course, this means terrorist attacks have increased. Take the so-called underwear bomber Chetan talked about, who tried to blow up the American airliner in 2009, or the Times Square bomber, who tried to attack central New York. Both cited drone strikes in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia as the source of their hatred and their motivation for war. General Stanley McChrystal, former leader of the US military in Afghanistan, was quoted recently as saying, "Resentment created by the American use of unmanned strikes is much greater than the average American appreciates. They are hated on a visceral level, even by people who've never seen one or have seen the effects of one. Now, as it stands, 76% of residents of northwestern Pakistan, where almost all of the strikes in the country are carried out, oppose and despise American drones. The numbers are hard to come by. Washington sweeps them up under the carpet as if they were not human lives. But it's reported that over 2,400 people have been killed in drone strikes by the Obama government, with hundreds upon hundreds of them civilians. Ladies and gentlemen, try to understand how drones have become a recruiting poster for local extremism. Their families attacked. They want to strike back, and they want to strike back at you. Obama told the nation in his inaugural address that America is a friend of each nation, of every man, woman, and child who seeks a future of peace and dignity. Well, I put it to you, the US is no friend to the 18 civilians in the Zawi Zigdag village in Pakistan. The US is no friend to that group of laborers and to that 14-year-old schoolboy. The US is no friend to the 8 rescuers who arrived to treat the wounded and were gunned down just 10 minutes later. The US is no friend to any innocent civilian killed by drone strikes. And those people killed, their friends, their neighbors, will be no friend to you.
Point of inquiry.
No, thank you. Their own local conflicts become globalized. Their focus and their target is you. How is inciting that kind of hatred an objective of national security? We're watching the rise of ISIS. We're watching a spiral of violence increase. I don't need to tell you how scary this is. Polls show that citizens of this country are now more terrified of terrorism than in the days after 9/11. I don't need to tell you how drone warfare is putting you in danger. You seem to already know. Thank you.
Now it's time for audience participation. You may send your questions to me via Top Hat. The details, again, are on page 11 in your program. I'll pose the questions to each team. They will have 5 minutes of what we call preparatory time. They may take in 1-minute increments, addressing me directly, telling me how many minutes they plan to use for their preparatory time. The timekeepers will keep track. When a team exhausts its 5 minutes of time, there will be no further time allowance. So what do we have? The first question goes to Oxford. If the United States does not pursue a military strategy of drone strikes, what military policy would be better enhancing national security objectives? Before drones, how were threats to U.S. security objectives addressed? Aren't drone strikes more precise than other methods? Since that's 3 questions, let's just deal with the first. All right? If the United States does not pursue a military strategy of drone strikes, what military policy would better enhance national security objectives?
Well, so there's a 2-part answer here. The first part is the Bush administration was known, and actually we were going to put this as a question, so this is a warning to you. The Bush administration was known as the administration of illegal detentions, of rendition, of Guantanamo, of Abu Ghraib. That was a period of capture and detention of terrorists. That not only, sure, there was no fair trial, and in the same way there's no fair trial for drone strikes in this Obama drone presidency, but there was capture. It was possible then. Why, just because there's a change of administration, it isn't possible now? That kind of capture not only could, in theory, though it wasn't under the Bush administration, allow for habeas corpus, allow for a fair trial before assassination of an imminent threat of a victim, potentially of a potential criminal. It also allowed for intelligence to be gathered on the ground rather than raised off the ground by a drone strike, which eliminates everything in the area, for example. And Mayank has the second part of the argument.
Yeah, so the core of our argument isn't necessarily that we have a problem with a one-off drone strike, which is particularly targeted, which is very open, the information gets to the American people. Our main problem really is the way that drone strikes are conducted by this administration, right? We argue that there are far too many of them, there is not enough information about them, and as Lisa and Polina kind of said, they are just counterproductive on the whole. We still think yes. For example, in the Amber, I'm really bad at that, sorry. In that case, yes, it was justified. We just think there are far too many occasions where it's not, and that's our main contention for this debate.
You still didn't answer the question. What's the alternative?
Sorry? An alternative is a more targeted policy. An open policy, which, people haven't.
Yes.
That doesn't really seem like an argument against U.S. drone policy. The resolution is, do drone strikes enhance our national security objectives? It seems that we're both agreeing drone strikes are perhaps a preferable method, but it's just a legality question in terms of how open or transparent they are. It doesn't seem like we're arguing different sides here.
Sorry, but it says U.S. drone strikes, and I'm going to take that as U.S. drone strikes right now, as they have been historically and as they are going on right now. And they are intolerable in terms of the secretive method in which they are conducted, and the fact that there is no fair trial, and the fact that there is no even openness about who is killed, who is considered a militant. That kind of thing breeds terrorism. That kind of thing creates an environment of violence, and that does not enhance national security objectives.
If we told Pakistan that we were sending a covert operation team to bin Laden's residence a week before we did conduct the operation, do you think bin Laden still would have been there?
Firstly, bin Laden wasn't actually killed by a drone. I thought that's
right.
That's just one point I want to say there.
It's a covert policy in the same way. Do you think we can conduct a war on terror where we tell the world who we're targeting, where we're targeting, and when we're going to target them?
No. What we're arguing for is a policy which is open, admittedly, after the point, not where you have to gauge, between 18 and 35, so they're probably a terrorist or a militant. What we're talking about, we want a clear breakdown of who was killed, because we think, personally, and I think these completely agree, if you kill someone, you should have a vague idea whether or not they are a terrorist, not just they're in the right age range.
Can you give me a scenario in which Anwar al-Awlaki was killed openly and transparently?
Can you give me a scenario where the US could justify the killing of his son? 16 years old, 2 weeks later, also an American citizen. How is that a national security objective? I'd like to hear someone explain how that was. It was explained in a redacted memo where most of it was blacked out. How are you? What are you telling to the people of Pakistan, for example, to the people of Yemen, that hey, like, trust us? We're killing him for legal reasons. Trust us. Drone strikes
it's an interesting question, but it's even more interesting that the governments of Yemen and Pakistan have requested that we conduct these strikes against their citizens because they are also aware they are a threat to the homeland.
Right.
There's a memo released by WikiLeaks that's cited from Pakistani military general Ashfaq Kayani, who privately asked the U.S. government to have continuous predator coverage over anti-government militants, and they've cleared their airspace for us to do so. It's not like we're just coming in and killing people without telling them and who they're killing.
Let me interrupt here because you're going to the question that someone in the audience has asked of UGA. Since when is attending a rally in a foreign country a reason enough to consider someone a threat to the United States or even a security threat to the world? Does the United States believe it is allowed to kill people just because they want to think? Is thinking a crime worth death?
Right.
At UGA.
Right, so I guess that's a question that is sort of tacking on to their point, the hypothetical that if there was a rally or debate that we would strike it and it would kill everyone. The first point I would like to make is that if that rally or that debate was occurring in the tribal areas of Pakistan, where the Taliban have a stronghold, where they actually train terrorists, then it's incredibly likely that that rally included a lot of terrorists, okay? We don't drone strike Islamabad. We drone strike in Pakistan, where the government has ceded sovereignty to tribal areas where terrorists are known to be, where we have the most successful drone strikes.
It's your conception of justice moral, where someone is simply assumed, without any prior, information, assumed to be a terrorist by virtue of the location in which they are in. I'm sorry, there's even a CIA memo, not a memo, sorry, a CIA leak in Mark Mazzetti's recent book about drone strikes, which says, it's a quote from a CIA operative saying, is he still a Taliban facilitator if he opened the gate for a Taliban truck? Well, we droned him. I'm sorry, that's not justice.
Two things. One, the question of morality, I think, is an important one that you've brought up, and it is it's certainly moral for the United States to drone strike terrorists that are bombing hospitals and schools and doing far more. They are a far larger percentage of civilian casualties than U.S. drone strikes. U.S. drone strikes represent a tiny fraction of civilian casualties in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but terrorist attacks and troops on the ground or planes that are manned by actual pilots represent a far larger percentage of civilian casualties. Also, the question for this debate is not, are drone strikes moral, but rather, on balance, do they enhance our national security objectives? And we think they certainly do.
Okay, so on that point, that actually refers back to a point of information I wanted to make in Chetan's speech. So yeah, you talked about, yes, we want to kill terrorists, but drone strikes are bad because they kill civilians. By the way, the Taliban kill lots of civilians. For the record, we don't particularly like the Taliban, okay? There are lots of other things that kill lots of people. We think that drone strikes are bad because they kill civilians. There are many other things. They kill lots of civilians. Malaria kills civilians. We don't think that's necessarily good. I don't think that's like, you're mischaracterizing it.
War kills civilians, period. We are at war, they are in a war zone. There are innocent lives that are going to be lost no matter what. 8 to 17% of all fatalities that are happening in Obama's drone campaign are from drone strikes. That means close to 80% of all other deaths are combatants or are occurring from other methods that are not drones. I think you're barking up the wrong tree for the method that's the most damaging in terms of what's killing civilians.
And in terms of how you define competence, you think that the current guidelines are a fair and accurate way to do it?
We don't think the current guidelines are perfect. We don't think drone policy as such is how it should be forever. We will obviously improve over the next 10 years. Just like when we invented nuclear weapons, our policies weren't perfect, but we got better at them. And so the question of whether we should just stop drone strikes or keep doing them is not the question of this debate. It's whether, on balance, they enhance national security objectives. So all of the arguments that Team Oxford is making beg the question of whether they are successful in taking out terrorist targets. And we have produced a multitude of evidence to indicate that they are extremely successful.
I think that's really, really interesting, because one of the first things that you talked about was this debate is about the history and what drone strikes have achieved in the past and the way that they have been. So yeah, I think we can make that argument that we're judging drone strikes at present and what they've been like in the past, without necessarily arguing that you can never have drone strikes in the future. So thank you actually for reiterating our point again.
Are we finished?
Yeah.
Well, we now are going back to our formal debate. Oh.
We're not finished.
The chair is going to recognize our final speaker, Ms. Polina Ivanova, from the Oxford Union for a speech not to exceed 6 minutes.
Well, thank you so much for that really warm welcome to UGA. I've got to tell you, when I said that I was coming here, my friends were confused. Athens, Georgia, that's in Greece, and the other one's next door to Russia. I mean, I think they thought I got the wrong flight and the wrong country and everything else. But ladies and gentlemen, to the point, we've heard a fantastic debate tonight. But now I want to give it a human face, that of all of us, because we do not vote here tonight with the same impunity with which the US government launches its drone strikes. We do not vote here alone. When you vote tonight, know that you send a message to the child going to school in a remote area of Pakistan who sees his classmates killed before him, vanished by an invisible machine. A message to the Yemeni bride whose wedding party turned to ash because in her stateless land, any gathering is seen as suspicious and as a legitimate target. But most importantly, you send a message to your government here that America no longer accepts to play according to the rules written by Osama bin Laden, that post-9/11 consensus of revenge followed by revenge in an endless spiral of violence. No more. I will now argue, reminding you of Mayank and Lisa's points and responding to something that the other side has not said, or has said, that drone strikes are not just bad for America's national security and national security objectives, but they quite simply put you in danger, put your children and future generations in danger. And I sincerely hope... Yes?
In a world where we send this message to the government, what does the government do then? What's the alternative? How does policy change?
Sorry, I don't quite understand. What do you mean?
So the audience sends a message to the US government, we don't like drone strikes.
Yeah, well, I'm getting to that.
What should the policy change to? What is the alternative to drone strikes?
Well, that's what we're saying. We're saying there is an alternative to drone strikes in that there's an alternative to drone strikes conducted in the manner in which they're currently conducted.
So
in a
more
secretive...
drone strikes?
No, not necessarily. There are other different options. You can also build peace. You can also... Okay, let's carry on. Fine. Firstly, the other side needed to prove to you that drone strikes are effective, which they claim that they are. But I don't agree with that. I'll tell you that random violence across the world against civilians is increasing. Al-Qaeda is still a powerful threat to the US, no matter what they tell you. It's still considered the #1 threat to the US. In Syria, a barbaric and anarchic breeding ground for terrorism is growing regardless of drone strikes. ISIS is getting ever stronger. Targeted killing by drones has been nicknamed in CIA circles as clipping toenails, as I mentioned before. You remove one militant leader and the next one grows to replace him. And as a result, the replacement is also angrier and more vengeful every time. Drones don't work. Secondly, and more importantly, in their current form, US drone strikes fuel terrorism. As Lisa explained, your president has handed to militant groups across the world a recruitment tool unlike any other. It creates, and I'm paraphrasing that very same president here, it creates more enemies than it takes off the battlefield. And that's not a national security objective, if you ask me. US drone strikes incite terrorism. They fan its flames. Try and see it this way. That terrifying hum, that barely visible shadow, it is a part of the daily life of already fragile communities. And what is America telling them? It's saying, those secret strikes that decimate your communities, they're legal. Trust us. We're not going to tell you how many people were killed. We're not going to give you any names or facts or justifications, but trust us. We're going to only communicate with you about the slaughter of your family in blacked out memos leaked by anonymous officials, but trust us. We've said that we can target any male of so-called fighting age in your village, but after his assassination, we'll call him a militant, and you've got to, guess what? Trust us. So I leave it up to the final speaker on the other side to try and tell us why such assassination abroad enhances national security objectives, because it baffles me. When it has had no demonstrable results, when terrorism is on the rise, when new leaders spring up each time, when more and more people begin to despise this country, to turn against it, and to see you as a legitimate target. When more and more, thank you, when more and more people are taught revenge, are taught how to kill, are taught that civilian lives are irrelevant by this very country. But I want to ask you one more question. What does a national security objective really mean? Don't let the other side tell you that it's simply foreign policy or it's simply, I don't know, the alternative. Yeah, anyway, I don't buy that, and neither should you. The only national security objective is you, your safety, your security, the safety of your children. And ladies and gentlemen, you did not vote for this war. You do not vote to become a target. Because every time a drone strike hits, there's no fair trial. Every time a drone strike hits, someone is taught that due process of law is not necessary, that there needs to be no accountability, that presidents are allowed kill lists and death squads, that for the US, democracy is one thing on paper and something completely different in practice. That deciding if a person halfway across the world should live or die is in the hands of one man in an Oval Office. This breeds anger, and that anger is not going to be directed at a barely visible buzzing robot in the sky. It's going to be directed at you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here tonight in the country of a constitution I have studied in so much detail, the land of democracy, the global exporter of rights and ideals, the shining beacon of freedom. If you believe in that America, in the same America that I studied at school and that millions across the world look to for inspiration and hope, if you believe in that America, vote with our side tonight. Don't vote with the side that says, what is the alternative? There must be an alternative that is produced by this country. We can't kill our way out of our problems, ladies and gentlemen, and don't let the other side tell you that we can. Look at history, it does not work.
Ms. Ivanova. The chair now recognizes the final speaker, Mr. Logan Gramzinski from the University of Georgia, for a speech not to exceed 6 minutes.
I would also like to thank the audience for coming out to support UGA, the prestigious judges, our coaches, Dr. Panetta, and our moderator, who I grew up watching on the news every night, and lastly, Team Oxford, who are an absolutely spectacular group of people. So spectacular, in fact, that I wish they would invite us to debate at Oxford. I have never, ever been to visit our former oppressor and would relish the opportunity to sample some of their world-renowned flavorless food. The Oxford UGA debate series is tied 2-2, which you all may be okay with across the pond with all the soccer craze, but in America we need a winner, and we think this debate is a decisive win for the affirmative for 2 reasons. One is that drone strikes are drastically effective at taking out high-level terrorist targets, and 2, there is no feasible alternative, and they have failed to present one. Now, if you think this debate is close and not the kind of UGA versus Troy way that we are presenting it, you think it's more like the Tennessee game, then we still think we win a close debate because the resolution says on balance. And it is essential that you remember this because U.S. drone strikes enhance our national security objectives with the concern of Pakistan in mind. Pakistan is the greatest national security threat to the United States. They've never challenged the fact that Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and they've never made a compelling case that Pakistan is a particularly strong, stable government. Please.
Sorry, we might not have said that Pakistan, we might not have talked about Pakistan's nuclear weapons, and we might not have talked about Pakistan being a strong ally, being a strong country, but if you conduct drone strikes in that country, what we have said is that you weaken that government. What we have said is that you push people towards extremism, towards overthrowing that government with an...
How much weaker can you get? They ceded sovereignty to the northern region of the country, the border of Afghanistan. The government of Pakistan invaded. They invaded in 2009, and it caused way more civilian casualties and displaced hundreds of thousands of people. The effect of the Pakistan military going in to the Fatah region to do the dirty work that the United States drone strikes do is way worse than the impacts of drone strikes.
Absolutely.
Do you think then it is preferable that if drone strikes are proven to lead to the downfall of the Pakistani government, we should have a government of sorts which has nuclear weapons, which is led by, as you said,
This is particularly eloquent, but there is no evidence to support the idea that drone strikes would cause the decline of the Pakistani government. No, that's okay. I've got some points. Maybe later, though. Maybe later. Okay. There is no feasible replacement for... Well, okay, first I'll talk about how effective they are at disrupting terrorism. They disrupt leadership. We are way ahead in this debate on the question of leaders of terrorist organizations like al-Awlaki, who was responsible for the Christmas Day bombing. And our 1AC, Eilidh, made a very persuasive argument about how drone strikes make planning difficult. The lovely hypothetical that they produced, whereas if everyone just gathered at a rally that would be drone struck, yes, that would be great for the United States if all the terrorists gathered in a rally. The point is that because we drone strike, they don't do that. They don't gather. They're scared of drone strikes, so they don't organize. They don't gather in large groups, which is really good for counterterrorism organizations or counterterrorism efforts. Now, there's no feasible replacement for drone strikes. What is the alternative? Capture? Where do we take them? Throw them in Guantanamo Bay? We cannot do that. George W. Bush's failed terrorist trial policies leave us with no better option. Sure.
Can I say where motion says, on balance, United States drone strikes are better than any alternatives at enhancing national security objectives?
Great. All right. So unless Great Britain just has a couple extra hundred James Bonds lying around that they're willing to drop into Pakistan, I think drone strikes are our best option. Now, you're right. They're kind of right. It's not that there are no good U.S. alternatives for fighting terrorism, but also, the international options for fighting terrorism are far worse indeed. The Pakistan military generates more casualties and displaces more people when they try to fight in the Fatah region, the tribal areas. They say that we should get open cooperation with allies. This sounds like a lovely, lovely thing, but the fact is, the Pakistan Army's image has been tarnished. The Army has not been able to eradicate the Pakistan Taliban, which has ravaged the state and its citizenry. Pakistan has reportedly demonstrated that it cannot exert sovereignty over the frontier on the Afghan border. Also, the Army has no incentive to admit that it needs the drone program to help it do what it cannot do on its own, kill Pakistani terrorists. It's also quite convenient that they argue civilian casualties lead to terrorist blowback, because the reason we strike in Pakistan is because their own peace deals broke down. Drone strikes are literally the only option left. Also, I could also wax poetic and tell you very sad stories about how terrorists kill people, women and children in the oppressive Taliban region. I don't quite have time, but suffice it to say, the numbers are on our side. Remember that in Afghanistan, they represent a tiny fraction of civilian deaths. There's a preponderance evidence that drones do not actually contribute much at all in the way of civilian casualties. I think Team Oxford's major hang-up with drones is that we fly them on the wrong side of the airway. It's also quite right to say, they made an argument that Obama didn't, well, that's not necessarily as important. Here's the most important thing. Drones are a tiny fraction of civilian casualties. Drones are a tiny fraction of the causes of terrorism, which are far greater than drone strikes. But they are a significant contributor in taking out terrorist organizations.
That actually ends our debate. Let's have a round of applause for our debaters. It is now time for the judges to retire for deliberation. And audience, please don't go far. At this moment, the House is in recess for judges' deliberations.
Our judges are returning, so we will be concluded in only a moment. Thank you.
The judges are back. It appears a winner has been determined. Before the winning team is revealed, judges, would you like to comment individually?
This will be my third debate that I've attended, and just like in the Olympics, it's safe to say that this is the best yet. We've got a plethora of talent on the stage here from both sides. That debate went back and forward with its momentum, and I think we should all be proud. Well done.
I share in those sentiments. All 6 of you did an outstanding job, and I particularly want to commend you for perhaps creating the most spirited audience participation that I've ever seen for an Oxford debate. So congratulations to all of you. Well done.
I also want to congratulate both teams here tonight for a splendid performance. You have taught us a lot and you've inspired us as future leaders. We thank you for your effort and for all that you did to prepare for the debate tonight. I'm going to announce now on behalf of the judges our
Oh, not yet. Not yet. Hold on. Hold on. We're going to hear the poll results. Who was the speaker of the match? The audience poll says it was a tie at 35% each, Ms. Ivanova and Mr. Gramzinski. And I kind of expected to hear this because it is Georgia. Which team had the more convincing arguments? The audience said 68% UGA, 32% Oxford. And now, Dr. Staten, you may go ahead and give us the winner. You're going to break the tie.
Thank you. I would say on behalf of the judges tonight that we believe that many great arguments were made in this debate. And we also believe that the debate went back and forth several times. And it was a very difficult decision for the judges tonight. But with respect to the resolution resolved on balance, the United States drone strikes enhance its national security objectives. The judges have found, on balance, that the UGA team made the best argument.
The House is now adjourned. Please welcome again Dr. Jamie McClung to end our evening.
Once again, I will be brief. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to our moderator, Monica Kaufman-Pearson, Thank you very much to our judges. And thank you. Yes. And thank you, of course, to our 6 debaters. It's been an absolutely amazing evening. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a very good night. Drive safely. And we will hope to see you again in 3 years.
At Oxford.
Good night.